She was just another mechanic checking engine diagnostics at Fort Thunderbolt's motor pool, grease under her fingernails, coveralls 2 sizes too big, and a quiet voice that barely carried over the rumble of diesel engines, the kind of soldier who blended into the background while others took center stage. But when Staff Sergeant Riley Ashford volunteered for the M1 Abrams combat exercise, the entire 3rd Armored Battalion erupted in laughter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Women can't handle 70 tons of American steel, Sergeant First Class Jake Donovan announced to his crew, loud enough for half the motor pool to hear. Especially not in combat conditions. His gunner, Corporal Tommy Briggs, snorted and slapped the side of their Abrams. She'll probably stall it before we even leave the staging area. But when Riley climbed into that driver's hatch, when her hands found the controls like she'd been born holding them, when the morning mist cleared and revealed what she was about to do with 1,500 horsepower and a main battle tank, that's when Donovan's crew realized they'd just challenged someone who spoke tank the way poets spoke verse. Now, before we show you exactly how a 5'4" mechanic made grown soldiers question everything they thought they knew about armored warfare, and the moment she executed a combat drift so perfect it's still talked about in tank schools across 3 continents, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Tap that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what started as mockery ended with respect. The pre-dawn air at Fort Thunderbolt carried the scent of diesel fuel, gun oil, and the kind of anticipation that comes before every major training exercise. The 3rd Armored Battalion had assembled for Operation Steel Thunder, a week-long combat simulation designed to test crew coordination, tactical maneuvering, and battlefield decision-making under pressure. Rows of M1 Abrams tanks sat like sleeping giants in the assembly area, their angular hulls catching the first rays of sunlight creeping over the Georgia pine trees. Staff Sergeant Riley Ashford arrived at 0500 hours sharp, her worn leather work gloves tucked into the breast pocket of her desert combat uniform. At 28, she'd spent 6 years maintaining these machines, learning every bolt, every circuit, every system that kept America's premier battle tank operational. Her personnel file listed her as a 91A tank system maintainer, but that designation barely captured the relationship she'd developed with these mechanical beasts. She moved through the motor pool with the quiet efficiency of someone who belonged there, checking fluid levels on Tank Alpha 77, running diagnostics on the fire control computer, ensuring every component met her exacting standards. Riley wasn't the type to announce her presence or demand attention. She earned respect through competence, solved problems through persistence, and treated each tank like a precision instrument rather than a blunt weapon. The morning briefing took place in the battalion headquarters, a temporary command post bristling with radio antennas and tactical displays. Major Patricia Caldwell, the exercise commander, stood before a wall-mounted map of the training area, detailing the day's objectives. "Today's scenario simulates a breakthrough operation," she announced. "Blue Force advances through contested terrain, while Red Force attempts to halt the advance using defensive positions and counterattacks." Sergeant First Class Jake Donovan commanded one of the most experienced crews in the battalion. His gunner, Corporal Tommy Briggs, had scored expert on the tank gunnery tables 3 years running. His loader, Private First Class Danny Martinez, could service the main gun faster than most crews could identify targets. They called themselves the Thunderbolts and wore their reputation like armor plating. "We need a driver for Tank Beta 41, Major Caldwell announced. "Specialist Rodriguez is down with a training injury." The assembled crews shifted uncomfortably. Being assigned to an unfamiliar tank with an incomplete crew was never ideal, especially during a major exercise. Riley raised her hand. "Ma'am, I volunteer." The briefing room fell silent. Donovan turned in his seat, eyebrows raised in disbelief. "With respect, Major, Ashford's a mechanic. She maintains tanks, doesn't drive them in combat situations." "I'm qualified on the M1A2 system," Riley replied evenly, "current on all driver training requirements." Donovan's crew exchanged glances. Briggs leaned forward. "Being qualified and being combat ready are two different things, Sergeant. This isn't a maintenance road test." Riley met his gaze without flinching. "Then it's a good thing I didn't volunteer for a maintenance road test." The tension in the room shifted subtly. Major Caldwell consulted her roster. "Ashford's certifications are current. She's assigned to Beta 4-1 as driver." She looked directly at Donovan. "Your crew will provide gunner, loader, and tank commander positions." Outside the briefing room, as crews dispersed toward their assigned vehicles, Donovan caught up with Riley. "Look, nothing personal," he said, matching her pace across the assembly area. "But driving a tank in combat simulation isn't like moving one around the motor pool. We're talking about coordinated maneuvers, obstacle navigation, live fire exercises. Things get intense out there." Riley nodded. "I understand the requirements, Sergeant." "Do you?" Briggs interjected, joining the conversation. "Because if you freeze up or make a mistake, it affects the entire crew. We've trained together for 18 months. We know each other's capabilities." "Then you'll learn mine," Riley said simply. Martinez whistled low. "She's got confidence, I'll give her that." The four of them approached Tank Beta 4-1, a battle-tested M1A2 Abrams bearing the scars of countless training exercises. Riley circled the vehicle methodically, checking track tension, inspecting road wheels, examining the external fuel cells with the practiced eye of someone who understood that mechanical failure could be deadlier than enemy fire. Donovan watched her inspection routine. Despite his reservations about her combat readiness, he couldn't fault her technical knowledge. She spotted a loose exhaust coupling that his crew had missed during their pre-operation checks. "Mount up," he called. "Let's see what you've got, Ashford." Riley approached the driver's hatch, removed her gloves, and placed both hands on the cold steel. For a moment she stood perfectly still, as if listening to something only she could hear. Then she climbed down into the driver's compartment, settled into the seat, and began her startup sequence. The engine turned over with a rumble that resonated through the entire vehicle. Riley's hands moved across the controls with fluid precision, checking gauges, testing systems, bringing 70 tons of American engineering to life. Through the intercom, her voice was calm and professional. "Driver ready. All systems nominal." But as they prepared to move out for the first exercise, none of them realized that Riley Ashford had spent her off-duty hours studying more than maintenance manuals. She'd absorbed tank tactics, memorized terrain analysis, and practiced maneuvers that most drivers never attempted. And in 6 hours, when the exercise reached its climax, Donovan's crew would discover that underestimating someone based on their job description was the kind of mistake that legends were built on. The training grounds at Fort Thunderbolt stretched across 15,000 acres of rolling Georgia terrain, dotted with concrete obstacles, wooden targets, and the kind of natural barriers that turn tank exercises into three-dimensional chess matches. Morning fog clung to the valleys between pine-covered hills, creating an almost ethereal landscape that would soon echo with the thunder of diesel engines and the crack of simulated gunfire. Tank Beta 4-1 rolled out of the staging area at 6:30 hours, joining a column of 12 M1A2 Abrams tanks that moved like a mechanical parade through the early morning mist. Riley kept perfect spacing behind Alpha 6-2, her movements smooth and controlled as they navigated the winding dirt roads that led to Exercise Area Bravo. "Driver, maintain interval!" Donovan's voice crackled through the intercom from the commander's position. "We're approaching the first checkpoint." "Copy TC," Riley responded, using the standard abbreviation for Tank Commander. Her hands rested lightly on the steering yoke, feeling the subtle vibrations that told her everything about the tank's condition. The transmission was running. Slightly warm, but within acceptable parameters. The left track needed tension adjustment, but it would hold for the exercise. Through his periscope, Corporal Briggs watched the terrain ahead. "This is easy stuff," he muttered to Martinez over the crew intercom. "Wait until we hit the obstacle course. That's where inexperience shows." The column halted at Checkpoint Alpha, a clearing dominated by a camouflaged command post and a cluster of communication vehicles. Exercise controllers moved between the tanks, conducting safety briefings and distributing the latest intelligence updates. Riley engaged the parking brake and performed her standard shutdown checklist, even though they'd only be stopped for 15 minutes. "Textbook so far," Donovan admitted grudgingly as he climbed out of the commander's hatch to receive the mission briefing. "But we haven't started the real test yet." Major Caldwell gathered the tank commanders around a sand table model of the training area. "Blue Force objective is to secure Hill 394, she announced, pointing to a scaled replica of elevated terrain 3 kilometers to the north. "Red Force has defensive positions along this ridgeline. Your approach routes are marked on your maps, but expect to adapt based on enemy contact and terrain conditions." Riley remained in the driver's compartment, studying her own copy of the tactical map while listening to radio chatter from other crews. The route to Hill 394 included 2 creek crossings, a series of steep grades, and what the map designated as rough terrain, military terminology for ground that could challenge even an M1 Abrams. Staff Sergeant Monica Torres, commander of Tank Alpha 35, leaned against Beta 41's hull. "How's your new driver working out, Jake?" she called up to Donovan. "Ask me again after we cross Devil's Creek," he replied. "That's where we separate the mechanics from the tank drivers." Torres laughed. "Devil's Creek? That's nothing. Wait until you hit the gauntlet. That obstacle course has been humbling tank crews for 20 years. From inside the tank, Riley listened to their conversation while double-checking her route cards. Devil's Creek was marked as a ford crossing, depth unknown, bottom composition listed as soft. The gauntlet was a series of concrete barriers, trenches, and steep embankments designed to test a crew's ability to navigate complex terrain under pressure. Martinez poked his head out of the loader's hatch. "You ever driven through water before, Ashford?" he called down to her. "Once or twice," Riley replied, not elaborating on the countless hours she'd spent studying fording procedures, calculating approach angles, and memorizing the M1's maximum wading depth specifications. "It's trickier than it looks," Briggs added from the gunner's position. "Current can push you sideways if you don't maintain momentum, and if you stall in deep water." He made a sinking gesture with his hand. Riley nodded politely, but her attention was focused on the tactical radio as other crews reported their positions. Alpha 77 had just crossed the first checkpoint. Charlie 29 was requesting maintenance support for a minor hydraulic leak. The exercise was proceeding according to schedule, but she could hear the tension building in the radio chatter as crews approached more challenging terrain. "Mount up," Donovan called. "We're moving to phase line green." Riley restarted the engine, the massive turbine spinning up to operational speed with a sound like controlled thunder. She eased Beta 41 back into the column, maintaining precise positioning as they left the checkpoint behind and entered the first section of challenging terrain. The trail wound through dense pine forest, barely wide enough for a tank to pass without scraping the trees on either side. Riley adjusted her speed constantly, reading the terrain ahead through her 3 periscopes while listening to Donovan's guidance from above. "Driver, obstacle ahead. Tree down across the road." Riley brought the tank to a smooth stop, studying the fallen pine that blocked their path. "I can push through it, TC. Trunk's not thick enough to stop us." "Negative. Back up 20 meters. We'll find another route." She shifted into reverse, backing precisely to the position Donovan had specified. Tank driving required absolute trust between commander and driver, especially when the driver's vision was limited to narrow periscope views. Most crews needed months to develop that level of coordination. "Left track, advance, right track, halt," Donovan commanded, guiding her through a pivot turn that swung the tank's nose toward a gap in the trees. "Forward, easy, watch the branches." Beta 4-1 pushed through the forest with surprising grace, Riley threading the 70-ton vehicle between obstacles that seemed too close for comfort. Briggs watched through his gunner's sight, impressed despite himself by her precise control. "Not bad for a wrench-turner," he muttered. They emerged from the tree line onto open ground, rejoining the main trail as it descended toward Devil's Creek. The morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing a landscape that looked deceptively peaceful, until you noticed the concrete bunkers, the wire obstacles, and the watching eyes of exercise controllers positioned to evaluate every move. "Phase line green in sight," Donovan reported over the radio. "Beta 4-1 continuing mission." Riley downshifted as they approached a steep decline, feeling the tank's weight shift forward as gravity took hold. This was still the easy part, she knew. The real test was coming, and when it did, Donovan's crew would learn that 6 years of maintaining tanks had taught her more than they realized about making them perform beyond their supposed limitations. The radio crackled with reports from other crews. Alpha 6-2 approaching water obstacle. Charlie 1-7 requesting route guidance around crater field. The exercise was building toward the moment when textbook procedures would give way to improvisation, when crews would be forced to demonstrate not just their training, but their instincts. And Riley Ashford, the quiet mechanic who spent her days elbow-deep in engine compartments, was about to show them what real instincts looked like. The descent toward Devil's Creek revealed terrain that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood exactly how to challenge tank crews. The trail switchbacked down a series of terraced slopes, each turn requiring precise throttle control to prevent the 70-ton Abrams from building too much momentum. Riley's hands moved constantly between the steering yoke and gear selector, reading the ground through subtle vibrations transmitted through the tank's suspension. "Driver, reduce speed!" Donovan's voice came through the intercom. "We're approaching the creek crossing." Riley had already begun decelerating, her eyes scanning the 3 periscopes that provided her limited view of the outside world. Through the center periscope, she could see the dark line of water ahead, flanked by steep banks that funneled the crossing into a narrow corridor, barely wider than their tank. Corporal Briggs rotated his turret slightly, using the gunner's primary sight to examine the water obstacle. "Looks deeper than the briefing indicated," he reported. "Current's running pretty strong, too." "Copy," Donovan replied. "Ashford, what's your assessment?" Riley brought Beta 4-1 to a complete stop 50 meters from the water's edge. This was the moment most crews would rely entirely on their tank commander's guidance, following orders without question. But Riley had spent too many years troubleshooting mechanical problems to accept information without verification. "Permission to dismount for visual inspection, TC." Donovan paused, Most drivers never requested to leave their compartment during exercises. Granted, make it quick. Riley popped her hatch and emerged from the driver's position, squinting in the morning sunlight as her eyes adjusted from the dim interior of the tank. She moved with purpose toward the creek bank, kneeling to examine the approach angle and water depth. Her movements were economical, professional, like a surgeon examining a patient. Private Martinez watched from the loader's hatch. She's taking this pretty seriously for a training exercise. Maybe too seriously, Briggs muttered. This isn't rocket science. You point the tank at the water and drive through it. But Riley was calculating variables that most crews never considered. The angle of approach would determine whether their front slope deflected water over the hull or channeled it into the engine compartment. The bottom composition would affect traction during the crossing. The exit angle would determine whether they could climb out smoothly or bog down in soft earth. She returned to the tank and dropped back into her hatch. Water depth approximately 4 feet at the deepest point. Rocky bottom with good traction. Recommend approach angle 15 degrees left of center to account for current drift. Donovan blinked. Most drivers would have simply said, "Looks good," or asked for guidance. Riley had provided a tactical assessment that belonged in an advanced armor course. "Copy your recommendation," he said, unsure whether to be impressed or concerned. "Execute crossing." Riley selected the appropriate gear and eased Beta 4-1 toward the water. The tank's nose dipped as they entered the creek, sending a spray of muddy water cascading over the hull. She maintained steady throttle, feeling the current push against their left side exactly as she'd predicted. The engine note changed as water reached the air intake louvers, but remained strong and steady. Riley made minute adjustments to their heading, compensating for the current's force while keeping them aligned with the exit point on the far bank. Through the intercom, she could hear Briggs calling out depth readings from his position. 4 feet, 4.5, holding steady at 5 feet, bottom solid. They reached the deepest point of the crossing, water lapping at the base of the turret ring. This was the critical moment when mechanical sympathy separated competent drivers from exceptional ones. Riley increased power slightly, feeling the tracks bite into the rocky creek bottom as they began climbing toward the far shore. "Nice work," Donovan admitted as they emerged from the water, excess moisture streaming from every surface of the tank. "Clean crossing." But Riley was already focused on the next challenge. According to her route card, they were approaching Exercise Area Charlie, where the terrain became significantly more complex. She'd studied the topographical maps during her off-duty hours, memorizing elevation changes, identifying potential problem areas, developing contingency plans for scenarios that might never occur. The radio crackled with reports from other crews. Alpha 77 experiencing transmission problems at grid 347521. Charlie 29 requesting recovery assistance through a track in the obstacle field. Tank warfare was unforgiving of mechanical failures and crew mistakes. A single error in judgment could disable a 70-ton vehicle and leave a crew stranded in hostile territory. Riley understood this reality better than most drivers because she'd spent years fixing the consequences of such mistakes. They crested a low ridge and entered the gauntlet, a section of terrain that looked like a concrete maze designed by someone with a sadistic sense of humor. Massive concrete blocks created a serpentine path between barriers barely wide enough for a tank to navigate. Steel posts jutted from the ground at precise intervals, forcing crews to thread their vehicles through gaps that required millimeter precision. "Jesus," Martinez breathed, looking out over the obstacle course. "Who designed this nightmare?" "Engineers with too much time and too much concrete," Briggs replied. "Ashford, hope you've been practicing your parallel parking." Riley studied the obstacles through her periscopes, mentally mapping the optimal path through the maze. Most crews approached this type of terrain with caution, creeping forward at minimum speed while their tank commander provided constant guidance. But Riley saw something different in the arrangement of barriers. The course was designed to test conventional thinking, to force crews into slow, methodical navigation. But there was another way through, a path that required precise timing and absolute confidence in the tank's capabilities. It was the kind of solution that maintenance personnel developed when they needed to move damaged vehicles through impossibly tight spaces. TC, request permission to take point for this section, Riley said quietly. Donovan frowned. Drivers didn't typically request to lead navigation through complex terrain. Explain your thinking, Ashford. I see a faster route through the obstacles, but it requires precise execution. Briggs laughed. Faster? Through the gauntlet. This course is designed to slow everyone down. Riley's voice remained calm and professional. That's one way to approach it. The radio chattered with updates from other crews, already engaged with the obstacle course. Alpha 3-5, negotiating barrier complex. Progress slow but steady. Charlie 1-7, request guidance around damaged concrete block. Every crew was treating the gauntlet like a puzzle to be solved methodically, step by step. Riley understood that approach, respected its logic, but she also knew that sometimes the best solution lay in reimagining the problem entirely. Show us what you've got, Ashford, Donovan said finally. But if you put us into a concrete barrier, you're buying the first round when we get back to base. Riley smiled behind her driver's periscopes. Copy that, TC. She positioned Beta 4-1 at the entrance to the obstacle course, hands steady on the controls, eyes scanning for the reference points she'd identified. What she was about to attempt would either demonstrate exceptional skill or spectacular failure. There wasn't much middle ground when you were driving 70 tons of steel through a space designed to test the limits of human precision. But 6 years of mechanical troubleshooting had taught her that limits were often assumptions, waiting to be challenged by someone willing to see beyond conventional solutions. The first concrete barrier loomed ahead like a monolithic gateway, its edges scarred by countless tank encounters over the years. Riley studied the gap between the primary obstacle and the secondary barrier, positioned 30 meters beyond it. Most crews would navigate this section by stopping, assessing, creeping forward, stopping again. The standard approach took 12 to 15 minutes to clear the entire course. Riley had a different timeline in mind. She eased Beta 4-1 forward, maintaining steady momentum as they approached the first gap. Through her center periscope, she could see the concrete edges that would scrape their hull if her alignment was off by more than 6 inches on either side. The margin for error was razor thin, but Riley had spent years maneuvering tanks through motor pool spaces that were equally unforgiving. Steady as she goes, Donovan coached from above, his voice tight with concentration. You've got clearance on both sides, but not much. Riley made a minute correction to their heading, feeling the tank respond with the precision of a well-tuned instrument. They threaded through the first obstacle cleanly, but instead of stopping to assess the next barrier, she maintained forward momentum while scanning for her next reference point. Ashford, halt for assessment, Donovan commanded. Negative, TC. I have visual on the path ahead. This was where most tank commanders would override their driver, asserting command authority to ensure safe navigation. But something in Riley's voice, absolute confidence without arrogance, made Donovan hesitate just long enough for her to commit them to the next phase of her planned route. The second obstacle was more complex, requiring a 30-degree turn between barriers while maintaining clearance from steel posts that jutted up like mechanical teeth. Riley downshifted and applied differential steering, pivoting Beta 4-1 through the turn with a smoothness that belied the complexity of the maneuver. Corporal Briggs watched through his gunner's sight, his earlier skepticism beginning to shift toward grudging respect. "She's reading the terrain like a road map," he muttered to Martinez over the intercom. "Still think this is beginner's luck?" Martinez replied, watching concrete barriers slide past their hull with inches to spare. The third section of the gauntlet required precise elevation control as they navigated a series of terraced concrete steps. Each level was just high enough to challenge the M1's climbing ability, while narrow enough to require perfect alignment. Riley approached the first step at an angle most crews wouldn't attempt, using the tank's momentum and the specific geometry of their approach to carry them up and over in one smooth motion. "How did she know that would work?" Briggs asked, genuinely puzzled. The maneuver Riley had just executed wasn't in any driver's manual he'd studied. Riley was already lining up for the fourth obstacle, a serpentine path between staggered concrete blocks that forced most crews into a series of stop-and-go movements. But she saw the rhythm hidden in the obstacle's design, the specific sequence of turns and adjustments that would allow continuous movement through the entire section. "TC, recommend maintaining current speed," she advised. Donovan felt his pulse quicken. Riley was asking him to trust her judgment through a section of terrain that had challenged experienced crews. "Ashford, this isn't the motor pool. If you miscalculate, we'll clear it clean," Riley interrupted, something she'd never done before. "Trust me." It was a breach of radio protocol that should have resulted in immediate disciplinary action. But there was something in her tone that transcended military hierarchy, the quiet authority of someone who understood their equipment so completely that doubt became irrelevant. Donovan made a command decision that would either validate Riley's confidence or end his career. "Execute." Beta 4-1 flowed through the serpentine obstacles like water finding its course downhill. Riley's hands moved constantly on the controls, making adjustments that were measured in degrees and inches while maintaining the forward momentum that kept them ahead of the timeline every other crew was fighting. The radio crackled with increasingly frustrated reports from other tank crews. "Alpha 6-2, still negotiating barrier complex. Estimate 20 minutes to completion. Charlie 2-9, request engineers support. Concrete block shifted during navigation attempt." Every other crew in the exercise was treating the gauntlet like an enemy to be defeated through patience and methodical progression. Riley treated it like a puzzle with a solution hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the right perspective to recognize it. They approached the final obstacle, a combination barrier that required climbing over a concrete ramp while threading between steel posts positioned to catch any tank that approached with improper alignment. It was the section that eliminated most crews who had made it through the earlier challenges, forcing them into time-consuming repositioning maneuvers. Riley studied the obstacle through her periscopes, calculating approach angles and timing sequences with the precision of an engineer solving a mathematical equation. She'd identified the key insight that made this obstacle conquerable. It wasn't designed to be approached head-on. "TC, recommend approach from grid bearing 285, she said, using precise military terminology to describe an angle that would align them with a gap most crews never noticed. Donovan checked his map. The bearing Riley had specified would take them 40 meters out of their way, approaching the final obstacle from what appeared to be the most difficult angle possible. "Ashford, that's not the designated route." "It's not the obvious route," Riley corrected, "but it's the efficient one." Around them, the sounds of other tank crews struggling with the obstacles carried across the training area. Metal scraped against concrete. Engines revved as drivers tried to power through sections that required finesse rather than force. Radio chatter grew increasingly tense as exercise controllers marked penalties for damaged obstacles and excessive completion times. Riley executed the approach she'd planned, bringing Beta 4-1 around to the bearing she'd specified. From this angle, the final obstacle revealed its hidden geometry, a path that would allow them to climb over the concrete ramp while using the steel posts as navigation guides rather than impediments. "I'll be damned," Martinez whispered, as he understood what Riley was attempting. "She's using the posts to funnel us through the perfect approach angle." It was the kind of insight that came from understanding machines at a level most operators never reached. Riley saw the gauntlet not as an obstacle course, but as a mechanical system with specific tolerances and optimal performance parameters, and she was about to demonstrate that those parameters could be exploited by someone who understood the physics involved. Beta 4-1 climbed the final ramp with textbook precision, threading between the steel posts with millimeters to spare on either side. They crested the obstacle and descended onto the flat ground beyond, completing the gauntlet in 8 minutes and 37 seconds. The radio fell silent. Then exercise control's voice crackled through their headsets. "Beta 4-1, confirm your completion time for the obstacle course." Donovan keyed his microphone, still processing what had just happened. "Exercise control, Beta 4-1 completed gauntlet in 8 minutes, 37 seconds. All obstacles cleared without contact." Another pause. Then, "Beta 4-1, stand by for verification." Riley brought their tank to a smooth stop in the completion area, shutting down to idle power while exercise controllers swarmed around their vehicle, checking for damage, confirming that they had indeed completed the course in record time without a single scrape or penalty. But the real test was just beginning, because what Riley had accomplished in the gauntlet was merely a preview of capabilities that would soon reshape everything Donovan's crew thought they knew about the quiet mechanic who had volunteered for their tank. The completion area beyond the gauntlet buzzed with activity as exercise controllers verified Beta 4-1's performance. Staff Sergeant Monica Torres approached their tank, her face a mixture of disbelief and professional curiosity. As commander of one of the battalion's most experienced crews, she'd never seen the obstacle course cleared in under 10 minutes. "Jake, what the hell just happened back there?" she called up to Donovan as he emerged from his commander's hatch. "My crew's been through that course dozens of times. Best we ever managed was 11 minutes, 40 seconds. Donovan climbed down from the turret, still processing the implications of what he'd witnessed. "Honestly, Monica, I'm not sure I can explain it. Ashford saw lines through those obstacles that I've never noticed before." Riley remained in the driver's compartment, conducting her post-movement checks with characteristic thoroughness. Engine temperature normal, transmission fluid pressure within parameters, track tension unchanged from pre-exercise measurements. To her, the mechanical condition of their tank was more important than the impressed murmurs of the gathering crowd. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Captain David Hartwell, the exercise safety officer, approached with his clipboard and measuring tape. "Sergeant Ashford, I need to understand your route selection through the barrier complex. Some of the approaches you took aren't in the standard tactical manual." Riley finally emerged from her hatch, squinting in the bright morning sun. "Which approaches specifically, sir?" "The diagonal ascent over the third obstacle, the lateral approach to the final ramp. Those maneuvers require calculations that most crews spend months developing. The physics are straightforward once you understand the tank's performance envelope," Riley replied matter-of-factly. "Ground pressure, approach angles, center of gravity displacement. The obstacles are designed with specific tolerances, Working within those tolerances makes the course navigable. Hartwell stared at her. You calculated ground pressure ratios during a live exercise? The calculations were done before we started moving. I studied the obstacle specifications during the planning phase. Corporal Briggs had climbed out of the gunner's position and was listening to this exchange with growing amazement. You studied obstacle specifications. Where did you even find that information? Riley shrugged. Engineering documents are available through the training support office. Most people don't request them. The gathering crowd of tank crews and exercise personnel fell silent. Studying engineering specifications wasn't unusual for maintenance personnel, but applying that knowledge to tactical maneuvering was something else entirely. Riley had approached the exercise with a level of preparation that bordered on obsessive. Ashford, Torres said slowly, how long did you spend preparing for this exercise? I reviewed the available technical data and conducted route analysis during off-duty hours over the past 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Martinez laughed. Most of us just showed up and figured we'd wing it. Major Caldwell arrived in her command vehicle, having received reports about Beta 4-1's performance that she initially assumed were measurement errors. She approached Riley with the focused attention of someone trying to solve an unexpected puzzle. Sergeant Ashford, your completion time represents a significant deviation from established baseline performance. I need to understand whether this was exceptional execution or if we've been underutilizing the course's potential. Riley considered the question seriously. The course is designed to test conventional tactical thinking. Most crews approach each obstacle as a separate problem requiring individual solutions. But the obstacles form an integrated system with optimal flow patterns. Flow patterns? Caldwell repeated. Yes, ma'am. Like components in an engine. Each part serves a specific function, but the overall performance depends on how the parts work together. The gauntlet isn't 12 individual obstacles, it's one complex mechanism with multiple operational phases. The assembled tank crews exchanged glances. Riley was describing tactical terrain using engineering terminology, applying mechanical principles to military maneuvering in ways none of them had considered. Sergeant First Class Jake Donovan found himself in the unusual position of defending a subordinate's expertise to his superiors. Ma'am, I can confirm that Sergeant Ashford's performance exceeded my expectations. Her route selection and execution were unconventional, but effective. Unconventional how? Caldwell pressed. She maintained momentum through sections where standard procedure calls for stopping and assessing. She identified approach angles that aren't covered in the training manuals, and she executed precision maneuvers that require a level of mechanical sympathy I've rarely seen. Riley shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. This level of attention wasn't something she sought or enjoyed. She preferred the quiet satisfaction of solving problems through methodical analysis and careful execution. Captain Hartwell consulted his notes. The next phase of the exercise is the live fire engagement, tank-on-tank scenarios with simulated ammunition. Are you prepared for that level of complexity, Sergeant? I've reviewed the engagement protocols and studied the ballistic computers, Riley replied. The fire control systems are similar to diagnostic computers I work with regularly. Briggs laughed, but not mockingly. Similar to diagnostic computers, the M1A2 fire control system is one of the most sophisticated targeting platforms in the world. Computer systems follow logical protocols regardless of their application, Riley said. Input parameters, processing algorithms, output results. The complexity doesn't change the fundamental operational principles. Torres shook her head in amazement. You're talking about tank gunnery like it's troubleshooting a transmission problem. Systematic analysis applies to any complex mechanism, Riley responded, whether it's identifying engine malfunctions or calculating firing solutions. Major Caldwell made notes on her tactical pad. Sergeant Ashford, your approach to this exercise represents a significant departure from standard training methodology. I'm interested to see how your analytical methods translate to dynamic combat scenarios. The radio crackled with reports from other crews still negotiating the gauntlet. Alpha 77, requesting engineer assistance. Damaged drive sprocket on obstacle 4. Charlie 17, completion time 14 minutes 22 seconds. Every other crew was struggling with challenges that Riley had navigated effortlessly. The time differential wasn't just impressive, it was beginning to reshape how the exercise controllers evaluated training effectiveness. "Mount up," Donovan called to his crew. "We've got a schedule to maintain." As they prepared to move to the next phase of the exercise, Riley conducted another systems check. The precision driving through the gauntlet had stressed their mechanical components, but everything remained within operational parameters. She made minute adjustments to track tension and monitored engine temperatures with the focused attention of someone who understood that mechanical reliability was the foundation of tactical effectiveness. But as they prepared to leave the completion area, none of them realized that the most challenging part of the exercise lay ahead. The live fire phase would test more than Riley's driving skills. It would force her to demonstrate capabilities that would fundamentally alter how everyone present understood the relationship between technical expertise and combat effectiveness. And when the moment came for her to apply 6 years of mechanical knowledge to a tactical situation that required split-second decision-making under pressure, Donovan's crew would discover that their quiet mechanic possessed instincts that couldn't be learned from any manual. The engine rumbled to life, and Beta 4-1 rolled toward the next phase of an exercise that was rapidly becoming something much more significant than routine training. The live fire range stretched across a valley that looked like the surface of an alien planet, scarred by countless training exercises and pockmarked with impact craters from years of tank gunnery practice. Concrete targets in the shapes of enemy vehicles dotted the landscape at distances ranging from 800 to 3,000 meters. Each target was equipped with sensors that would register hits and calculate scoring based on accuracy, reaction time, and tactical decision-making. Beta 4-1 took its position at firing point Bravo, one of 6 prepared positions overlooking the engagement area. Riley performed her standard checks while listening to the fire mission briefing over the radio. The exercise scenario called for engaging multiple targets while maneuvering through designated corridors, simulating the kind of dynamic combat situation where tank crews had to balance accurate gunnery with tactical movement. "Driver, we're going to be moving and shooting simultaneously," Donovan explained over the intercom. "That means you'll need to provide a stable firing platform while navigating rough terrain. Think you can handle that?" Riley studied the topographical display on her driver's information panel. The engagement area included several elevation changes, soft ground near a seasonal creek, and scattered obstacles that would force constant course corrections. "Roger, TC. Recommend we discuss coordination between movement and fire commands." Briggs, settling into his gunner's position, laughed. "Coordination. Just keep us pointed in the right direction and try not to throw off my aim when you hit the bumps." "Gunnery effectiveness depends on chassis stability during the firing sequence," Riley replied. "If we coordinate movement patterns with engagement windows, we can optimize both mobility and accuracy." The comment drew strange looks from her crewmates. Most drivers focused exclusively on getting from point A to point B, without getting stuck or hitting obstacles. Riley was proposing to integrate driving technique with fire control procedures at a level that required understanding both systems equally well. "Ashford," Donovan said carefully, "how much do you know about the fire control computer?" "I've performed maintenance on the ballistic computer array, the laser rangefinder assembly, and the stabilization gyroscopes. The system calculates firing solutions based on range, target motion, atmospheric conditions, and vehicle movement parameters." Martinez, loading practice rounds into the main gun, paused in his work. "Vehicle movement parameters. The computer compensates for chassis motion during firing, but compensation has limits. If the driver provides a stable platform during target acquisition and maintains predictable movement during engagement, the system's accuracy improves significantly." Briggs turned in his gunner's seat. "You're talking about driving technique affecting gunnery scores?" "Every mechanical system has optimal operating conditions," Riley explained. "The fire control computer works best when vehicle motion falls within specific parameters. Most drivers aren't aware of those parameters." The radio crackled with the exercise controller's voice. "All stations, commence live fire exercise. Engage targets as they appear. Time limit 15 minutes. The first target materialized at 1,200 meters, a pop-up silhouette representing an enemy tank. Briggs acquired the target through his thermal sight, while the laser rangefinder calculated distance, and the ballistic computer generated a firing solution. "Target acquired," Briggs reported, "ready to engage." "Driver, advance to position Charlie," Donovan commanded. "Maintain firing stability." Riley engaged the transmission and began moving toward their next position, but instead of the rough, bouncing ride most crews experience during movement to contact scenarios, she selected a path that minimized chassis disruption. She'd identified micro-terrain features that would provide the smoothest possible ride while maintaining tactical positioning. "Fire!" Donovan ordered. The main gun erupted with a sound like controlled thunder, sending a practice round downrange toward the target. Despite moving at 20 kilometers per hour over broken ground, the shot struck dead center. "Target destroyed," the exercise controller announced. "Excellent shot, Beta 4-1. Briggs stared at his targeting display. "I barely had to adjust for movement. The platform was rock steady." "Next target, 2 o'clock, 1,800 meters," Donovan called. "Driver, position for engagement." Riley had already spotted optimal firing ground 50 meters to their right, a slight elevation that would provide clear fields of fire while offering hull-down protection. She maneuvered Beta 4-1 into position with movement so smooth that Briggs could maintain target acquisition throughout the approach. "How is she doing that?" Martinez muttered, watching the horizon remain perfectly steady through his vision blocks, despite their movement across rough terrain. The second target appeared, followed quickly by a third. Riley coordinated her driving with the engagement sequence, providing stability during target acquisition, optimal positioning for each shot, and immediate movement to the next firing position. It was a level of crew coordination that most teams required months to develop, but their performance was beginning to attract attention beyond their own crew. Other tank commanders monitoring the tactical frequency could hear the rapid succession of target confirmations from Beta 4-1's position. "Alpha 7-7 to exercise control," crackled over the radio. "Request confirmation on Beta 4-1's target count." "Beta 4-1, 6 targets engaged, 6 targets destroyed. Current elapsed time, 8 minutes, 30 seconds. The achievement was extraordinary. Most crews managed 3 or 4 targets in the allotted time, with accuracy rates around 70%. Beta 4-1 was running perfect scores while maintaining pace that exceeded normal expectations. Staff Sergeant Torres, monitoring from her own firing position, keyed her microphone. "Jake, what's your secret over there?" Your gunnery scores are off the charts." Donovan paused before responding. He was beginning to understand that Riley's impact on their performance extended far beyond simple driving competence. "We've got good coordination between driver and gunner," he replied diplomatically. "Coordination, hell," Torres shot back. "Nobody gets those kinds of scores without exceptional crew integration. How long have you been training together?" The question hung in the air because the honest answer was embarrassing. They'd been training together for exactly 4 hours since the morning briefing. Everything they were accomplishing was happening in real time, without the months of practice that normally preceded this level of performance. The 7th target appeared at maximum engagement range, 3,000 meters across broken terrain that would challenge both gunnery and driving skills. Most crews approached long-range engagements by stopping, stabilizing, and taking careful aim. Riley saw an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that transcended standard tactical procedures. "TC, recommend we engage while moving," she said over the intercom. "I can provide a stable platform through the engagement window." Briggs laughed nervously. "Moving engagement at 3,000 meters. That's expert-level stuff, Ashford. I've never attempted that shot." "The ballistic computer can handle the calculations," Riley replied. "I'll handle the platform stability." Donovan faced a command decision. Standard procedures called for stationary engagement at maximum range, but their performance throughout the exercise had exceeded every standard procedure they'd encountered. Riley hadn't been wrong yet. "Execute moving engagement," he ordered. Riley selected the optimal approach route, calculating speed and direction to provide Briggs with the smoothest possible firing platform while closing distance to improve hit probability. She coordinated her movement with the fire control computer's tracking sequence, maintaining precise speed control that allowed the system to generate an accurate firing solution despite their motion. "Steady, steady, fire." The practice round screamed downrange, covering 3,000 meters in less than 4 seconds before striking the target with pinpoint accuracy. "Target destroyed," came the controller's voice, but now with a note of amazement. "Beta 4-1, that was a moving engagement at maximum range. Confirm your procedures." Every crew on the range was listening now, trying to understand how a mechanic and an improvised crew were redefining performance standards in real time. But what they were witnessing was only the beginning. The exercise was about to enter its most challenging phase, and Riley Ashford was about to demonstrate that 6 years of understanding machines could produce capabilities that no training manual had ever documented. The exercise scenario shifted dramatically as the controller's voice crackled through the radio with new instructions. "All stations prepare for dynamic engagement phase. Red Force armor is advancing through Sector 7. Blue Force will conduct movement to contact and engage targets of opportunity. This is free maneuver. Crews are authorized to select their own routes and engagement positions." Major Caldwell had introduced the wild card element that separated routine training from genuine tactical challenges. Instead of engaging stationary targets from predetermined positions, the crews would now face simulated enemy tanks operated by experienced controller teams, moving unpredictably across terrain that offered both opportunities and dangers. Riley studied her tactical display as red icons began appearing across the engagement area. 3 enemy tank positions moving in coordinated formation, seeking positions where they could engage Blue Force vehicles with advantage. The scenario had transformed from a gunnery exercise into something resembling actual combat. "Driver, head for Hill 287, Donovan ordered, indicating elevated ground that would provide overwatch of the enemy advance routes. "Standard approach, use the ridgeline for concealment." Riley examined the topographical data on her display, calculating multiple approach routes to the designated position. The standard approach Donovan had specified would take them along a covered route that kept them hidden until they crested the hill. It was tactically sound, professionally competent, and exactly what every other crew would attempt. TC, recommend alternative approach via grid 442386, she said quietly. Donovan checked his map. The grid coordinates Riley had specified indicated a route that seemed to violate basic tactical principles. It would take them across open ground where they could be spotted and engaged by enemy forces. Negative, Ashford. That approach leaves us exposed. Copy, TC. Riley began executing the route Donovan had ordered, but her mind was already working through contingencies. 6 years of troubleshooting mechanical failures had taught her that sometimes the obvious solution wasn't the optimal solution. Sometimes you had to accept calculated risks to achieve results that conventional methods couldn't deliver. They moved toward Hill 287, using terrain features for concealment, following doctrine that had been developed through decades of armored warfare experience. But as they approached their firing position, Riley noticed something in the enemy movement patterns that made her previous recommendation suddenly relevant. Contact, 12 o'clock, 2,200 meters, Briggs reported, acquiring one of the Red Force tanks through his thermal sight. Target is moving left to right, seeking firing position. Riley watched the tactical display as additional enemy icons appeared. The Red Force tanks were positioning themselves to engage Blue Force vehicles as they occupied the obvious overwatch positions. Hill 287 was turning into a kill zone, and every Blue Force crew following standard tactics was moving directly into it. TC, Riley said urgently, recommend immediate displacement to alternate position. Current route leads to enemy engagement area. Donovan was tracking the same tactical picture, recognizing the developing threat. But displacing from their planned position meant abandoning the mission and seeking alternative ground that might not provide adequate fields of fire. Alpha 77 taking fire, Torres' voice erupted over the radio. We're pinned down at grid 445398. Request immediate support. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Red Force had anticipated Blue Force movements and positioned themselves to engage from superior positions. Standard tactics were leading to predictable results, and those results were catastrophic for the Blue Force teams. Beta 4-1, this is exercise control. You are cleared to provide supporting fire to Alpha 77. Expedite movement to firing position. Riley made a decision that violated every principle of military chain of command. Instead of waiting for Donovan's orders, she altered their course toward the grid coordinates she'd identified earlier. The route would take them across exposed ground, but it would also position them to engage the Red Force tanks from an unexpected angle. Ashford, what are you doing? Donovan demanded as he realized they were deviating from his planned route. Providing supporting fire from a position they won't anticipate, Riley replied, her voice calm despite the tactical complexity of what she was attempting. You're taking us across open ground. They'll spot us before we reach firing position. Not if we move fast enough and use the terrain shadows correctly. Riley had calculated an approach that exploited micro-terrain features invisible to most observers. Shallow depressions, scattered vegetation, and elevation changes that appeared insignificant on tactical maps, but could provide concealment for a tank crew that understood how to use them. She increased their speed to 40 kilometers per hour, faster than most crews would attempt across broken ground, while following a serpentine route that kept them in terrain shadows. The movement required precise throttle control and split-second timing to coordinate their passage between concealment features. Jesus, Ashford, Martinez called out as they bounded over a small ridge. Slow down before you throw a track. But Riley understood Beta 4-1's mechanical limits. better than anyone else in the crew. She knew exactly how much stress the tracks could handle, how the suspension would respond to high-speed maneuvers, how the engine would perform under sustained load. 6 years of maintaining these machines had given her insights that couldn't be learned from technical manuals. "Contact front," Briggs shouted. "Enemy tank, 1,500 meters. He's got us." The Red Force tank had spotted their movement and was traversing its main gun toward Beta 4-1. In seconds, they would be under direct fire with nowhere to hide. Standard procedure called for immediate halt and return fire, hoping to win a gunnery duel against an enemy that already had them targeted. Riley saw a different solution. Instead of stopping to engage, she executed a maneuver that belonged in stunt driving rather than tank warfare. Using the momentum they'd built during their high-speed approach, she initiated what could only be described as a controlled drift, using differential steering and precise throttle control to slide their 70-ton tank sideways while maintaining forward momentum. The maneuver accomplished several things simultaneously. It threw off the enemy's target tracking, making their tank nearly impossible to hit with a precision weapon. It positioned their gun tube toward the threat while maintaining mobility, and it demonstrated capabilities that redefined what everyone present thought they knew about armored vehicle operation. "What the hell was that?" Briggs gasped, struggling to acquire targets while their tank performed movements that seemed to defy physics. "Combat drift," Riley replied as if describing a routine maintenance procedure, redirecting momentum vector while maintaining tactical positioning. The enemy round passed harmlessly through the space they had occupied 2 seconds earlier. Riley completed the drift maneuver, bringing Beta 4-1 to a perfect firing position with their main gun aligned on the threat. "Target acquired," Briggs announced, his voice filled with amazement and adrenaline. "Fire," Donovan ordered. The practice round found its mark perfectly, but what happened next would be remembered long after the exercise ended, because the combat drift Riley had just executed wasn't something that could be learned from any training manual. It was the kind of instinctive mechanical sympathy that came from understanding machines at a level that transcended conventional operation. And everyone watching was beginning to realize they had just witnessed something that would change how they thought about tank warfare forever. The silence that followed their impossible maneuver lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the radio exploded with chatter from crews across the training area who had witnessed something that challenged their understanding of what an M1 Abrams could do. "Exercise control, did you see that movement from Beta 4-1? Alpha 35's commander transmitted, his voice tight with disbelief. "Confirm visual on Beta 4-1's tactical maneuver," came the controller's response. "Stand by for evaluation." Riley brought their tank to a complete stop in perfect firing position, the engine settling to idle as if the preceding 30 seconds of physics-defying maneuvering had been routine maintenance work. She conducted her standard post-movement checks, while her crewmates struggled to process what had just happened. "Ashford," Donovan said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper over the intercom, "what exactly did you just do to my tank?" "Executed a momentum-redirected positioning maneuver," Riley replied, monitoring engine temperature and track tension with her usual methodical attention. All systems remained within operational parameters throughout the procedure. Corporal Briggs rotated his gunner's sight to scan for additional threats, but his hands were shaking slightly. "Operational parameters. You just made a 70-ton tank drift like a sports car." "The physics are straightforward once you understand the traction coefficients and center of gravity relationships," Riley explained, as if discussing tire pressure rather than a maneuver that had never been documented in military literature. Martinez, still gripping his loader's handles from the wild ride, laughed with nervous energy. "Straightforward? I've been in tanks for 4 years and I've never seen anything like that. The tactical radio crackled with new information. All stations, Red Force has been neutralized. Exercise Control is conducting immediate after-action review. Beta 4-1, remain in position for detailed debriefing. Major Caldwell's command vehicle appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust, as it raced across the training area toward their position. Behind it followed a convoy of exercise controllers, safety officers, and what appeared to be several vehicles that hadn't been part of the original exercise plan. "Looks like we've attracted some attention," Donovan muttered, watching the approaching convoy through his commander's periscope. Riley continued her systems checks with deliberate calm. The combat drift had stressed their mechanical components in ways that normal operation never did. She found minor variations in track tension and slight elevation in transmission fluid temperature, but everything remained within acceptable limits. The tank had performed exactly as she'd calculated it would. Staff Sergeant Torres arrived first, dismounting from her tank and approaching Beta 4-1 with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that violated known laws. "Jake, I need to understand what just happened here." Donovan climbed out of his commander's hatch, still processing the implications of what his crew had accomplished. "Honestly, Monica, I'm not sure I can explain it. Ashford executed a maneuver I didn't know was possible." Torres looked up at Riley, who was emerging from the driver's compartment to conduct external inspection of their tracks and suspension. "Sergeant Ashford, that movement you performed, where did you learn that technique?" Riley knelt beside the left front road wheel, checking for stress indicators and debris. "It's an adaptation of principles used for recovering disabled vehicles in confined spaces. Same physics, different application." "Recovery operations?" Torres repeated. "You're talking about maintenance procedures. Vehicle recovery requires understanding momentum, traction, and mechanical stress under non-standard operating conditions," Riley explained, moving to check the right track assembly. "The same principles apply to tactical maneuvering when conventional methods are insufficient." Major Caldwell arrived with her entourage of observers, including Captain Hartwell and several officers Riley didn't recognize. One of them wore the insignia of an armor school instructor. Another appeared to be from the Combat Development Center. "Sergeant Ashford," Major Caldwell began, "I need a detailed explanation of the maneuver you just performed. Our safety officers are concerned about stress limits, and our tactical evaluators want to understand the military applications." Riley straightened from her inspection, her hands dirty from checking mechanical components. "Ma'am, the maneuver utilized controlled loss of traction to redirect vehicle momentum while maintaining gun target orientation. Execution required precise coordination of throttle, steering, and brake inputs to keep stress levels within acceptable limits." The armor school instructor stepped forward. "Sergeant, I've been training tank crews for 15 years. What you just did isn't covered in any manual I know of. How did you develop this technique?" "I didn't develop it, sir. I adapted existing recovery procedures for tactical application." Riley's voice remained calm and professional. "The M1A2's mechanical capabilities exceed standard operational parameters under specific conditions." "What specific conditions?" Captain Hartwell asked, taking notes rapidly. Riley considered the question. "When the tactical situation requires performance beyond conventional doctrine, understanding the machine's actual limits becomes more important than following established procedures." The statement hung in the air like a challenge to decades of military training methodology. Riley wasn't criticizing doctrine, but she was suggesting that doctrine had limitations that could be overcome by deeper mechanical understanding. Colonel Patricia Vance, the armor school instructor, studied Riley with the focused attention of someone recognizing exceptional competence. Sergeant Ashford, you're suggesting that mechanical sympathy can compensate for tactical disadvantage. I'm suggesting that machines can do more than most operators realize, if the operator understands the engineering tolerances and stress factors involved. Donovan watched this exchange with growing amazement. His quiet mechanic was discussing advanced tactical theory with senior officers, using terminology that belonged in engineering journals rather than field manuals. The maneuver you performed required split-second timing and precise control inputs, Colonel Vance continued. That level of coordination typically requires months of practice. Riley nodded. Understanding the mechanical response characteristics eliminates most of the practice requirement. When you know exactly how the machine will react to specific inputs, execution becomes a matter of calculation rather than trial and error. Briggs, listening from his gunner's position, shook his head in wonder. She's talking about tank driving like it's applied mathematics. All mechanical operation is applied mathematics, Riley replied matter-of-factly. Most people just don't calculate the equations consciously. The assembled officers exchanged glances that suggested they were witnessing something significant. Riley Ashford wasn't just an exceptional tank driver. She represented a fundamentally different approach to armored warfare, one that integrated mechanical expertise with tactical application in ways that challenged traditional training methods. But none of them realized that what they had witnessed so far was merely a preview. The exercise had revealed Riley's capabilities, but it hadn't tested their limits. And when the full scope of what she could accomplish with 70 tons of American engineering became clear, it would reshape how the entire armored community understood the relationship between machine and operator. Major Caldwell consulted her tactical display one final time. Sergeant Ashford, your performance today has exceeded all established benchmarks for this exercise. I'm recommending you for advanced tactical evaluation. Riley looked up from her mechanical inspection, a wrench still in her hand. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. But everyone present knew that what they'd witnessed went far beyond any job description in the military classification system. They had seen the future of armored warfare, and it looked nothing like what any of them had expected. The convoy of vehicles surrounding Beta 4-1 grew larger as word of Riley's performance spread through the training area. Tank crews who had completed their exercises early arrived to see the mechanic who had redefined what they thought they knew about armored warfare. Exercise controllers huddled around tactical displays, reviewing recorded data that challenged decades of performance baselines. Colonel Vance circled Beta 4-1 slowly, examining the track marks left by Riley's combat drift with the focused attention of an investigator studying evidence. The gouged earth told a story of forces and vectors that shouldn't have been possible to control in a 70-ton vehicle. The stress patterns in these track marks, she said, kneeling to examine the compressed soil, indicate lateral force application that exceeds standard operational envelopes. How did you maintain mechanical integrity during this maneuver? Riley wiped her hands on a maintenance rag, having completed her post-operation inspection. The stress loads were distributed across the track system's design tolerances. Individual components and experienced peak loading, but within acceptable parameters for short-duration application. Short duration, Captain Hartwell repeated. How short are we talking about? Approximately 4.7 seconds of non-standard loading, Riley replied, with the precision of someone who had calculated every aspect of what she'd attempted. Track assemblies are rated for impact loading significantly higher than sustained operational stress. Major Caldwell studied the tactical replay on her mobile display, watching the recorded sequence of Riley's maneuver from multiple camera angles. Sergeant Ashford, according to our tracking data, You maintained gun target orientation throughout a lateral displacement of 37 meters. That level of coordination between driver and gunner typically requires— "Ma'am," Corporal Briggs interrupted from his position in the turret. "Permission to speak freely?" Caldwell nodded. "Granted. I didn't coordinate anything with Ashford. She maintained platform stability that kept my targeting solution locked throughout the entire maneuver. I've never experienced anything like it." The admission drew surprised looks from the assembled officers. Crew coordination was considered fundamental to tank operations, requiring months of training to achieve the level of integration Beta 4-1 had demonstrated. Staff Sergeant Torres approached Riley directly. "How long have you wanted to be a tank driver?" Riley considered the question. "I never wanted to be a tank driver, Sergeant. I wanted to understand how tanks work." "There's a difference?" "Driving is operating the machine according to established procedures. Understanding is recognizing what the machine is actually capable of accomplishing." Colonel Vance looked up from her examination of the track marks. "Sergeant Ashford, you're describing a relationship with military equipment that goes beyond standard operator training. Where did you develop this level of mechanical intuition?" 6 years of troubleshooting failures," Riley replied. "When something breaks, you have to understand how it was supposed to work in order to fix it. After a while, you start recognizing capabilities that normal operation never explores." Private Martinez climbed down from his loader's position, still energized from the afternoon's events. "Colonel, you should have seen her navigate the gauntlet this morning. She found routes through those obstacles that I didn't think existed." "The obstacles follow engineering principles," Riley explained. "They're designed to test specific capabilities, but design parameters define both limitations and possibilities. Understanding the parameters reveals solutions." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, this one bearing the markings of the Armor Center's Advanced Research Division. 2 civilians emerged, carrying tablet computers and measurement equipment that suggested scientific rather than military interest in the proceedings. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead researcher, approached Major Caldwell. "Major, we received reports of anomalous vehicle performance that warrant immediate evaluation. Our models suggest the maneuvers described in your preliminary report shouldn't be mechanically feasible." "Doctor, meet Sergeant Riley Ashford," Caldwell said. "She's the one who performed the maneuvers in question." Dr. Chen studied Riley with the focused attention of someone accustomed to analyzing complex data. "Sergeant Ashford, our computer simulations indicate that the combat drift you executed would result in catastrophic mechanical failure. How do you account for the discrepancy?" Riley met the scientist's gaze calmly. "Your simulations probably assume standard operational inputs. The maneuver required non-standard input sequences that exploit elasticity in the mechanical systems." "Elasticity?" Dr. Chen's colleague, Dr. James Morrison, joined the conversation. "You're talking about engineering tolerances as if they were tactical resources." "They are tactical resources," Riley replied. "Most operators don't utilize the full performance envelope because they're trained to operate within conservative parameters. But conservative parameters aren't optimal parameters under all conditions." Dr. Chen made rapid notes on her tablet. "You're suggesting that current training methodologies underutilize vehicle capabilities." "I'm suggesting that understanding the engineering enables tactical applications that standard training doesn't address." The assembled group fell silent as they processed the implications of Riley's statement. She wasn't just describing exceptional individual performance. She was identifying systematic limitations in how the military approached armored vehicle operation. Colonel Vance broke the silence. "Sergeant Ashford, would you be willing to demonstrate your techniques for our training development teams?" Riley glanced at Donovan, recognizing that the question carried implications beyond simple instruction. "Sir, I'd be happy to share what I've learned, but I'm not sure my methods would transfer easily to other operators." "Why not?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Because the techniques require understanding mechanical systems at a level that goes beyond operational training. It's not enough to know which control does what. You have to understand why the machine responds the way it does to specific inputs." The honesty of Riley's assessment highlighted a fundamental challenge in military training. Exceptional performance often depended on knowledge and intuition that couldn't be easily codified into standard procedures. Major Caldwell consulted her watch. "We're approaching end of exercise time, but I think this discussion warrants continuation. Sergeant Ashford, I'm authorizing extended evaluation of your capabilities." "Ma'am, what kind of evaluation?" "The kind that determines whether what we've witnessed today represents individual excellence or a new approach to armored warfare that could benefit the entire force." Riley looked around at the gathered officers, researchers, and tank crews, all focused on understanding something she had never considered remarkable. To her, the morning's events had been applications of engineering knowledge to mechanical problems. She hadn't realized she was challenging fundamental assumptions about military training. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I was just trying to do the job as effectively as possible." Dr. Chen smiled for the first time since arriving. "Sergeant Ashford, that's exactly what makes your approach so valuable. You weren't trying to revolutionize anything. You were just thinking clearly about mechanical capabilities." But as the convoy of vehicles prepared to escort Beta 4-1 back to the motor pool, none of them fully understood what Riley had accomplished. The combat drift had been spectacular, but it was only one example of what became possible when someone truly understood the machines they operated. And tomorrow, when word of the exercise spread through military communities around the world, Riley Ashford would become the center of discussions about the future of armored warfare, whether she wanted that attention or not. The engine started with its familiar rumble, and Riley prepared to drive back to base, unaware that she had just changed everything. The motor pool at Fort Thunderbolt had never seen this level of activity after a routine training exercise. Word of Riley's performance had spread through unofficial channels, faster than any official report could travel, drawing tank crews, maintenance personnel, and officers from across the installation to witness the aftermath of what was already being called the impossible maneuver. Riley parked Beta 4-1 in its designated bay with characteristic precision, aligning the tank perfectly with the maintenance markings on the concrete floor. She shut down the engine and began her standard post-operation procedures, seemingly oblivious to the crowd gathering around their parking area. Sergeant First Class Jake Donovan climbed out of the commander's hatch, still processing the events of the day. In 18 years of military service, he'd never experienced anything that challenged his understanding of equipment capabilities the way the past 8 hours had. He watched Riley emerge from the driver's compartment and immediately begin her detailed mechanical inspection, checking components with the same methodical attention she'd shown that morning. "Ashford," he called down to her, "the tank performed flawlessly today. You don't need to inspect every bolt and fitting." Riley looked up from beneath the tank where she was examining track tension. "TC, the maneuvers we performed today stressed the mechanical systems beyond normal operational parameters. Preventive inspection identifies potential problems before they become failures." It was a response that perfectly captured Riley's approach to everything: methodical, thorough, and grounded in understanding rather than assumption. She treated exceptional performance as a reason for increased attention rather than decreased vigilance. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes, the Motor Pool NCOIC, approached with a mixture of professional curiosity and supervisory concern. "Ashford, I've been getting calls from battalion headquarters about your driving today. Something about maneuvers that aren't in the technical manuals?" Riley continued her inspection while responding. "Sergeant, I executed tactical movements using established mechanical principles. All operations remained within engineering tolerances." "Engineering tolerances?" Hayes repeated. "I've been maintaining tanks for 22 years. What you did today wasn't maintenance, it was something else." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Vance and her research team, followed by Major Caldwell and what appeared to be several officers Riley didn't recognize. The gathering crowd created an unusual atmosphere in the normally routine environment of the motor pool. Dr. Chen approached Riley with her tablet, displaying preliminary analysis of the exercise data. "Sergeant Ashford, our initial review confirms that your maneuvers generated performance data outside all established baselines. We'd like permission to conduct detailed mechanical inspection of your vehicle." Riley straightened from her position beneath the tank. "Ma'am, what kind of inspection?" "Stress analysis on critical components, measurement of wear patterns, assessment of any damage resulting from non-standard operation," Dr. Morrison explained. "We need to understand how the vehicle sustained the forces involved in your combat drift." Riley nodded toward Beta 4-1. "You're welcome to inspect the tank, but you won't find any damage. The maneuver was calculated to remain within material limits." "Calculated how?" Dr. Chen asked, genuinely curious about Riley's methodology. "Force vectors, coefficient of friction, elastic deformation limits of track assemblies, stress concentration factors in the drivetrain," Riley replied, as if reciting a shopping list. "The engineering data is available if you know where to look for it." Master Sergeant Hayes stared at his subordinate with new understanding. "Ashford, you've been studying engineering specifications during your off-duty time?" "Sergeant, understanding the equipment makes maintenance more effective. If you know why something works, you can predict how it will fail and prevent problems before they occur." The assembled group exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to comprehend the depth of Riley's technical knowledge. She wasn't just an exceptional operator, she was applying engineering principles to military equipment in ways that transcended traditional training boundaries. Colonel Vance consulted her notes from the afternoon's observations. "Sergeant Ashford, your performance today suggests capabilities that could revolutionize armored training methodology. Would you be interested in participating in advanced evaluation programs?" Riley continued her post-operation checks while considering the question. "Ma'am, what kind of evaluation programs?" "Programs designed to understand and document non-standard techniques that could improve overall force effectiveness," Major Caldwell explained. "What you accomplished today could benefit tank crews throughout the military." "Ma'am, I'm not sure my methods would transfer to other operators. The techniques require understanding mechanical systems at a level that goes beyond standard training." Dr. Morrison looked up from his preliminary measurements of the track marks. "That's exactly what makes your approach valuable, Sergeant. You've identified performance capabilities that could be systematically developed." The discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Corporal Briggs and Private Martinez, both carrying their personal equipment and looking somewhat overwhelmed by the attention their crew was receiving. "Ashford," Briggs said, "I've been thinking about what happened today. That platform stability you provided during the moving engagement, I've never experienced anything like it. How did you coordinate throttle control with my targeting sequence?" Riley finished checking the final road wheel before responding. "I monitored the fire control systems, stabilization inputs, and coordinated vehicle movement to minimize disruption to the ballistic computer's calculations." You monitored the fire control system? Martinez repeated. From the driver's compartment. The stabilization system sends movement data to multiple vehicle subsystems. The information is available on the driver's display if you know how to interpret it. Briggs shook his head in amazement. You were reading my targeting data while executing tactical maneuvers. Gunnery effectiveness depends on platform stability. Providing optimal conditions for target engagement is part of effective driving. The statement revealed another layer of Riley's approach to tank operations. She didn't view her role as simply moving the vehicle from one location to another. She understood driving as one component of an integrated weapons system, requiring coordination with all other vehicle functions. Master Sergeant Hayes made a command decision. Ashford, effective immediately, you're reassigned to special projects pending evaluation of your capabilities. Report to Major Caldwell tomorrow morning for detailed briefing. Riley looked up from her inspection checklist. Sergeant, I haven't completed post-operation maintenance on Beta 4-1. The maintenance team will handle final inspection, Hayes replied. You've got bigger responsibilities now. But Riley wasn't comfortable leaving mechanical work incomplete. Sergeant, the tank performed beyond normal parameters today. Proper maintenance requires understanding what stresses were applied and how the systems responded. Her reluctance to abandon her maintenance responsibilities, even when offered advancement opportunities, perfectly illustrated the mindset that had made her exceptional performance possible. Riley understood that exceptional results required exceptional attention to fundamental principles. Colonel Vance observed this exchange with growing appreciation for Riley's character. Sergeant Ashford, you can complete your maintenance inspection, but tomorrow we begin exploring how your approach to armored operations could benefit the entire force. Riley nodded and returned to her checklist, methodically documenting the condition of every system she'd stressed during the day's exercises. Around her, officers and researchers continued discussing implications and possibilities, but her focus remained on the immediate task of ensuring that Beta 4-1 would be ready for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Because Riley Ashford understood that taking care of the machine was the foundation that made everything else possible. 3 months later, the Armor Training Center at Fort Benning buzzed with an energy that hadn't been seen since the introduction of new tank technology decades earlier. Officers from allied nations, defense contractors, and military researchers had gathered to witness the culmination of what had become known as the Ashford Protocol, a revolutionary approach to armored vehicle operation that integrated mechanical engineering with tactical doctrine. Riley stood in the briefing room wearing the crisp dress uniform she rarely had occasion to put on, facing an audience that included generals, defense secretaries, and representatives from tank manufacturers across 3 continents. The woman who had once preferred the quiet anonymity of maintenance work now found herself at the center of discussions that would reshape military training worldwide. The fundamental principle, Riley explained to the assembled audience, is that understanding mechanical limits enables tactical possibilities that conventional training never explores. When operators comprehend the engineering tolerances of their equipment, they can achieve performance that exceeds established doctrine. General Patricia Morrison, the commanding general of the Armor Center, leaned forward in her seat. Sergeant Ashford, your techniques have been validated through extensive testing, but implementation requires training methodologies that integrate engineering education with tactical instruction. How do we scale that level of technical knowledge across entire armored units? Riley had spent the past 3 months working with education specialists, engineers, and tactical experts to answer exactly that question. Ma'am, the solution isn't teaching every operator to be an engineer. It's teaching them to recognize when engineering principles can solve tactical problems. Dr. Chen, who had become Riley's primary research partner, activated a presentation display showing performance comparisons between conventional training and the Ashford Protocol. Traditional training focuses on operational procedures, what to do in specific situations. The Ashford approach teaches conceptual understanding, why machines respond the way they do to operator inputs. The data was compelling. Tank crews trained using Riley's methods demonstrated 40% improvement in complex maneuvering, 35% better accuracy during movement-to-contact scenarios, and 60% reduction in mechanical failures during high-stress operations. But the implications extended beyond simple performance metrics. Colonel Vance, now director of the Advanced Armored Tactics Division, stood to address the audience. What Sergeant Ashford has demonstrated challenges fundamental assumptions about the relationship between operator and machine. She's shown us that exceptional performance isn't about superhuman skills. It's about deeper understanding of the systems we operate. Riley watched the faces in the audience, recognizing the mixture of excitement and skepticism that accompanied paradigm shifts in military thinking. Change was never easy, especially when it required acknowledging that existing methods had been suboptimal. The combat drift that initially brought attention to these techniques, Riley continued, wasn't an isolated maneuver, it was one example of what becomes possible when operators understand that their equipment has capabilities beyond standard operating parameters. A representative from the British Army raised his hand. Sergeant Ashford, your methods require significant investment in technical education. How do we justify the cost and time required to retrain existing forces? Riley had anticipated this question. Sir, the initial investment in education is substantial, but the long-term benefits include reduced maintenance costs, improved operational effectiveness, and enhanced survivability. Understanding equipment better means using it more efficiently and breaking it less frequently. Major Caldwell, now serving as liaison between the research division and operational units, provided supporting data. Field testing has confirmed that units trained in the Ashford Protocol experience significant reductions in mechanical failures and maintenance requirements. The improved operational effectiveness pays for the training investment within 18 months. But for Riley, the technical and economic arguments were secondary to something more fundamental. She had discovered that when people truly understood the machines they operated, they developed relationships with their equipment that transcended mere procedure following. They became partners with their technology rather than servants to it. Master Sergeant Hayes, who had been promoted to manage the new training program, stood to address implementation concerns. The challenge isn't convincing people that these methods work. The data speaks for itself. The challenge is changing institutional culture that has relied on procedural training for decades. Riley nodded, understanding the resistance that innovative approaches often encountered in traditional organizations. Sergeant Hayes is correct. The techniques require operators to think differently about their relationship with their equipment. That's a cultural shift as much as a training shift. Dr. Morrison activated another display showing global implementation timelines. We're beginning pilot programs with Allied forces next quarter. Initial training will focus on maintenance personnel and experienced operators who can adapt advanced techniques most readily. The afternoon session included live demonstrations on the testing range, where tank crews trained in the Ashford Protocol performed maneuvers that continued to challenge conventional understanding of armored vehicle capabilities. Riley watched from the observation area as drivers executed precision movements that she had once performed instinctively, now systematized into teachable techniques. Staff Sergeant Monica Torres approached during a break in the demonstrations. Riley, watching those crews perform maneuvers you developed is surreal. You've changed how an entire generation of tankers will think about their jobs. Riley smiled, still somewhat uncomfortable with the attention her work had generated. I just applied engineering principles to tactical problems. The real achievement belongs to the crews who learn to execute these techniques systematically. But Torres understood something that Riley was still learning to accept. You didn't just develop new techniques. You proved that institutional knowledge has limits, and that individual insight can transcend those limits when it's grounded in solid understanding. As the formal presentations concluded and the international delegation prepared to depart, General Morrison approached Riley with final thoughts. Sergeant Ashford, your contributions to armored warfare will influence military operations for generations. But beyond the technical innovations, you've demonstrated something equally important about the value of curiosity and continuous learning. Riley straightened to attention, still feeling somewhat out of place among the senior leadership that now regularly sought her expertise. Ma'am, I was just trying to understand how things work. Exactly, General Morrison replied, and that curiosity led to discoveries that no one else had made. That's the kind of thinking we need to encourage throughout the force. As the assembled officials departed and the training center returned to its normal operational rhythm, Riley found herself reflecting on the unexpected path that had led from routine maintenance work to international recognition. She hadn't set out to revolutionize anything. She had simply applied the same methodical problem-solving approach to tactical challenges that she used for mechanical repairs. But perhaps that was the most important lesson of all. Innovation often came not from trying to be revolutionary, but from applying existing knowledge in new ways, asking different questions, and refusing to accept limitations as permanent constraints. Riley returned to her new office in the research division, where technical manuals and engineering specifications covered every available surface. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, and new opportunities to discover what became possible when human curiosity met mechanical precision. The quiet mechanic who had once preferred working alone had become the center of a transformation that would reshape armored warfare worldwide. But at her core, Riley Ashford remained what she had always been, someone who understood that taking care of the machine was the foundation that made everything else possible. So, what do you think? Could understanding your tools and equipment at a deeper level unlock capabilities you never knew existed? Have you ever achieved something exceptional by truly understanding how something works, rather than just following procedures? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story reminded you that expertise comes from curiosity and attention to detail, hit that like button. Subscribe with notifications turned on so you never miss these inspiring stories of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things. And while you're here, check out our next video about the chef who revolutionized fine dining by understanding the science behind cooking. Same time tomorrow. I'll see you there. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.